She was 22 and sleeping inside a broken bus shelter behind a gas station. Every night, she folded her coat into a pillow and pressed her backpack against her chest so nobody could steal it while she slept the winter air in northern Montana, carried a sharp smell of diesel, and wet gravel trucks passed the highway all night long. Their headlights swept across her face like silent reminders that everyone else was going somewhere. And she wasn't. Lena Hart hadn't spoken to her mother in almost a year. Her father was gone long before that. The only family member who had ever truly seen her was her grandfather, and he'd been dead for 6 winters now. By the time she found a railroad car, she had exactly $11.43 left. It sat abandoned near an overgrown rail yard outside the town of Mercer Ridge. Rust covered the steel walls. One window was cracked. The faded number 214 still clung to the side beneath layers of dirt. Most people saw junk, but the old yard owner sold it to her for $10 because he thought she was crazy enough to actually want it. That night, Lena stepped inside, holding a flashlight and one thin blanket. The railroad car smelled like old cold iron and something else. Something hidden. But what she didn't know was someone had left something inside that car decades earlier. Something nobody had found. And over the next few weeks, the strange sounds beneath the floorboards would lead her toward a secret connected to her grandfather and a hidden past that would change her life forever. Before we continue, if stories like this make you feel something, if they remind you that even broken places can hide hope, take a second to subscribe and stay with us until the end. Because this story isn't really about money. It's about what people leave behind without realizing it. Lena grew up in a tiny town where winters felt endless. Her grandfather, Walter Hart, lived in a narrow white house beside the old train tracks that no longer carried passengers. Paint peeled from the porch rails, the gutters sagged every spring, but inside smelled like cedar with coffee machine oil and old paper. Walter repaired watches, not expensive ones. Pocket watches, railroad watches, broken clocks people forgot in drawers for 20 years before bringing them to him wrapped in cloth. Lena used to sit beside him at the workbench. When she was little, she remembered the yellow lamp above the table, the tiny screwdrivers lined up perfectly, the soft ticking sounds filling the silence between them. You can tell a lot about people, he once told her, carefully adjusting a cracked watch hand by the things they keep even after they stop working. She never forgot that. Walter had worked for the railroad when he was young, not as an engineer. He repaired timing mechanisms and signal clocks for freight lines across Montana. Back then, railroads depended on perfect time. One mistake could kill people. Walter respected precision more than anything. Every Sunday morning, he wore the same brown suspenders and polished boots, even after retirement, even after arthritis twisted his fingers. Lena's mother hated that house, said it smelled old, said Walter filled Lena's head with useless stories. But Lena loved every second there, especially during storms. Rain tapping against windows, the warm hum of the kettle, Walter speaking softly while trains moaned in the distance. He taught her how to repair simple gears before she turned 12, not because he thought she'd become a watchmaker, because he believed broken things deserved patience. When Lena was 14, her father disappeared after gambling away most of the family savings. Her mother changed after that, harder, quieter. Bills stacked across the kitchen table every month. Sometimes the electricity shut off for days. Sometimes dinner was canned soup stretched across 3 nights. Walter helped when he could, but he was getting old. His hands shook more each year. Still, every birthday, he gave Lena something small, a compass, an old railway token, a brass key with no explanation. Some things only make sense later, he would say with a tired smile. Then came the winter he died. The snow reached halfway up the porch steps that year. Lena remembered standing in his silent workshop after the funeral. The clocks had stopped ticking, dust floated through pale morning light. She found a note on the workbench in Walter's handwriting, not addressed to anyone, just a sentence. People hide the truth inside ordinary things. At 16, she dropped out of school to work at a diner. At 18, her mother remarried and moved away with barely a goodbye. At 22, after losing her apartment and job in Billings, Lena drifted from town to town with a backpack, 2 sweaters, and a coffee tin full of old watch parts Walter once gave her. That was all she had left of him. Or so she thought. Mercer Ridge wasn't much more than a forgotten railroad town. Half the storefront stood empty. Wind pushed dust through the streets. Old tracks split the town like scars. Lena arrived near sunset, riding inside the back of a produce truck after convincing the driver to let her stay hidden beneath crates. She climbed down beside an abandoned grain elevator and stared at the rail yard stretching across the edge of town. Rows of dead tracks, rusting equipment, broken freight cars swallowed by weeds. And there it was, Railroad Car 214. The old yard owner Earl Donnelly laughed when she asked about it. "You planning to live in that thing?" he asked. "Maybe. That car has been sitting there since the 80s. "How much?" Earl squinted at her, then shrugged. $10. She handed over almost everything she had. The metal key felt freezing cold in her palm. That first night inside the railroad car, Lena barely slept. Wind groaned against the steel walls. Something rattled underneath the floor whenever temperatures dropped. At first, she thought it was mice. But around midnight, she heard 3 slow knocks beneath her feet, then silence. Lena sat upright in darkness, gripping her flashlight. Her breath fogged the air. Nothing moved, but the sound had been real. Morning light revealed how damaged the car truly was. The wooden floorboards warped upward in places, water stains spread across the ceiling, rust flakes covered corners like dead leaves. Still, it was shelter. Lena spent the next days cleaning. She swept dirt into piles, pulled out broken crates, found old railroad spikes hidden beneath debris, and every now and then, she noticed strange markings carved into the wood near the back wall. Tiny symbols, numbers, not random, almost like measurements. One evening, while scraping grime from the floor, her screwdriver slipped through a narrow crack between boards, far deeper than expected. She frowned. The floor beneath sounded hollow, but only in one section. That night, the knocking returned. 3 slow knocks. Pause. 2 more. Lena pressed her ear against the floor. Nothing. Then, a faint metallic vibration, like something shifting far below. The next morning, she searched under the car with a flashlight. Mud, rust, old axles. Nothing unusual. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something inside the railroad car was wrong, or unfinished. Days turned into weeks. Lena found small jobs around town, washing dishes and stacking shelves at a feed store. People in Mercer Ridge barely noticed her at first, except for a widow named Ruth Keller, who owned a small grocery store near the tracks. Ruth always gave Lena day-old bread without mentioning it. One snowy evening, Ruth asked where she lived. The old rail yard. Ruth stopped counting change. In the brown freight car. Yeah, a strange expression crossed Ruth's face. "My husband used to talk about those rail cars," she said. "Quietly said some railroad workers hid things during the strikes back in the 70s. "What kind of things?" Ruth shook her head. Never said. That night, Lena couldn't stop thinking about it. She examined the carved markings again. Some looked familiar. Then suddenly, she remembered. Walter used to mark repair measurements exactly the same way. Small angle lines. Tiny circles beside numbers. Her chest tightened. Could he have worked on this car? No. Impossible. Still, the thought stayed with her. Later that night, while rain hammered the roof, Lena noticed something else. One section of the wall remained colder than the others. She pressed her hand against it. Hollow. Very hollow. But before she could investigate further, a train horn echoed somewhere far across the valley. And beneath her feet, the knocking started again, louder this time. The next morning, Lena borrowed tools from Earl. "Crowbar, hammer, pry bar. You fixing that death trap?" he joked. Trying. Hours passed as she carefully removed damaged floorboards near the back corner. Dust filled the air. Rust stained her hands. Then suddenly, she found a metal plate hidden beneath the wood, bolted shut. No rust around the edges, meaning someone had sealed it carefully, not accidentally. Her pulse quickened. She ran her fingers across the surface and froze. Scratched into the metal were 2 letters. W.H. Walter Hart. Lena stepped backward. The entire railroad car suddenly felt different, quieter, like the past itself was breathing inside it. Why would her grandfather's initials be hidden beneath the floor? And why had nobody found this before? She worked until sunset trying to loosen the bolts, but they wouldn't move. That night she barely slept. Rainwater dripped somewhere inside the walls. The steel creaked softly in cold air, and in the darkness memories returned. Walter smiling beside the lamp. Walter handing her the brass key years ago. Walter saying, "Some things only make sense later." Lena sat upright suddenly. The brass key. Her backpack shook as she searched through old belongings. At the bottom of the coffee tin filled with watch part, she found it. Small, heavy, brass, and stamped with a faded railroad symbol. Her hands trembled. The next morning snow covered the rail yard in silence. Lena knelt beside the hidden metal plate and slid the brass key into a tiny opening she hadn't noticed before. Click. The sound echoed inside the floor. Slowly the metal hatch lifted. Cold air rushed upward, carrying the smell of cedar oil and old paper. There was a compartment beneath the railroad car. Not huge, but carefully built. Inside sat 3 weatherproof boxes wrapped in faded canvas. Lena stared in disbelief. Her breathing turned shallow. For a long moment she couldn't move. Then she opened the first box. Bundles of old cash. Carefully sealed. Not millions, but enough to change a life. The second box held silver coins, railroad bonds, and small gold pieces wrapped in cloth. Lena's hands shook harder now, but it was the third box that made her stop breathing completely. Inside lay Walter's leather journal, and beneath it, an old pocket watch she recognized instantly. He used to carry it every day. Lena opened the journal slowly. The first page read, "If Lena ever finds this, it means she kept going." Tears filled her eyes immediately. The journal explained everything. During the railroad strikes decades earlier, several workers secretly hid emergency savings inside abandoned rail equipment, not stolen money. Survival money. Walter had protected part of it after a dangerous foreman threatened workers who tried organizing for fair pay. Most men involved eventually died or moved away. The railroad car was forgotten, but Walter never forgot. He wrote that he wanted Lena to find it one day, not because of the money, because he believed she would understand why it mattered. Inside the journal were sketches, repair notes, memories, and letters he never sent. One passage made Lena cry harder than the others. "You were never broken, Lena, just waiting for a safe place to stop." She sat there for nearly an hour inside the freezing railroad car, holding the journal against her chest. Outside, snow fell quietly across the abandoned tracks. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Lena didn't become rich overnight. Most of the money went toward legal paperwork, taxes, repairs, and debts. Some railroad bonds had value. Others didn't. The silver helped. The gold helped more. But the real change happened slowly. She repaired the railroad car piece by piece. New insulation. New windows. Fresh paint. Ruth helped her find cheap furniture. Earl taught her basic welding. And every night, Lena read Walter's journal beneath a warm lamp, just like the one in his workshop. Inside the journal were watch repair diagrams, techniques, names of suppliers, old customer notes. So Lena started repairing watches again. At first, only simple ones. People brought broken clocks from barns and attics. Then travelers started hearing about the girl in the railroad car who fixes timepieces. Months later, Lena turned the old freight car into a tiny repair shop. Not fancy, but alive. Warm light glowed through the windows at night. The smell of cedar returned. The ticking returned too. Sometimes she caught herself speaking aloud to Walter while working, as if he were still nearby. One afternoon, a little boy entered carrying his grandfather's broken pocket watch. "Can you fix it?" he asked quietly. Lena smiled. "I'll try." And for the first time in many years, she truly meant it. People think hidden treasure changes lives because of money. But sometimes, the real treasure is proof that someone believed in you before you learned to believe in yourself. Walter didn't leave Lena a fortune. He left her patience, purpose, a place to begin again. The railroad car had been abandoned by everyone else, just like she had. And maybe that was why she found it. Broken things recognize each other. 1 year later, winter, returned to Mercer Ridge. Snow covered the tracks again. But Railroad Car 214 no longer looked forgotten. Fresh paint covered the steel walls, warm yellow light glowed through restored windows. A small wooden sign hung beside the door. Heart timekeeping and repair. Some evenings Lena still stepped outside after closing and listened to distant freight trains moving through the valley. Cold air, soft snow, the same world, but not the same girl. She often thought about the night she first entered the railroad car with only a blanket and $11 left to her name. Back then she believed her life had ended. Now she understood something different. Sometimes life hides its beginning inside the very place everyone else gave up on. And deep beneath the old floorboards of a forgotten railroad car, a grandfather had quietly left hope waiting for her to find it. If this story touched you in any way, subscribe for more emotional mystery stories like this one. And in the comments, tell us about something small someone left behind that still means something to you today. Sometimes memories are worth more than money. Subscriber.